This is Seema Arora, and this is a podcast on sustainability, climate, business, economy, and tech. I'm very privileged to have a return guest on the show. His name is Professor Froeb, and he is the William and Margaret Oehmig Associate Professor of Entrepreneurship and Free Enterprise at the Owen Graduate School of Management at Vanderbilt University. He obtained his PhD in economics from the University of Wisconsin, undergrad at Stanford. Professor Froeb served as the chief economist at the Federal Trade Commission from 2003 through 2005, where he managed over 100-plus team and brought down barriers to competition and enforced consumer protection and antitrust laws of the United States. He's also an amazing professor, having won many teaching awards at the Owen Graduate School of Management, and is also an author of a book on managerial economics. So it's with a great privilege that I welcome you back to the show. And I'm excited to discuss with you the case about RealPage, which is a landmark case and which covers issues. It's a case where the Department of Justice filed against RealPage, which is a revenue management software company, which is used by landowners, landlords, and property managers. And the allegation was that there is collusion in this algorithmic price setting. And just kind of a rough description about the case and where it stands right now. In August of 2024, the Justice Department sued RealPage for algorithmic pricing scheme that harms millions of American renters. And this was an antitrust lawsuit that was filed against RealPage. The complaint alleged that RealPage contracts with competing landlords who agreed to share with RealPage non-public competitively sensitive information about their apartmental rental rates and other lease terms to train and run RealPage's algorithmic pricing software. In November of 2025, the Justice Department required RealPage to end the sharing of this competitively sensitive information and alignment of pricing among competitors. And the Justice Department's Antitrust Division filed a proposed settlement to resolve the U.S.'s claims against RealPage as part of its ongoing enforcement against algorithmic coordination, information sharing, and anti-competitive practices. Now, between that time frame and now, the case has been where it stands as RealPage has settled, but without any show of violation of Sherman Acts 1 or 2. And so this is a good point for entry for Professor Froeb to kind of comment on the work that he has done. And before I quickly hand it over to him, I'm gathering his insights on a paper that he has written jointly with the two other professors, Professor Tschantz at the Department of Mathematics at Vanderbilt University and Sokol, Professor of Law and Marshall School of Business at University of Southern California. And we are going to discuss this paper that they have written and shed some light on what the department is doing. So take it from me, Luke, and at the end I'll also give more detailed reference on the paper as well.
Okay, thank you very much. Thrilled to be here, and thank you for inviting me. Anyway, the Department of Justice, DOJ, sued RealPage and some of its large users for algorithmic price fixing. And what the software does is it helps big apartment managers keep track of who's there, what have they been paying, how long they've been there. And it'll compute things like expected occupancies. So you have to get more people in to interview. There's a rule of thumb, that I've heard that you have to get 3 people in to see an apartment for every one that will actually rent. And so if I've got 15 apartments coming vacant, I better get 45 people in to see them, One of the things that the software also does is recommend rents. So if you can, there's a lot of things the software does, but it also recommend rents. So if you say, hey, I want a target occupancy of 95%, it'll recommend rents to what price or rent that you should charge to get there. And that's the basic what it does is it really helps you manage the building, but to figure out but to figure out what the software actually does, you have to, to figure out whether or not the apartment colludes, you have to really understand what's going on in this industry. And that's where I think the case falls apart, or where there's a shortcoming. And the kind of unique characteristics of apartments are heterogeneity. Apartments are marvelously heterogeneous, where they're located, what the amenities are, who else lives there. Those are just some of the characteristics that are hard to measure. And, if you're running a collusion, you have to figure out, okay, what price should we all charge, and how do we monitor, the agreement? I want to make sure nobody's cheating on the agreement, lowering price and stealing some people who would have gone to me. And so that's the first characteristic. The other characteristic is demand is uncertain. I don't know who's going to show up.
Yeah.
And so if I rent the apartment today, I'm giving up the opportunity to rent it to somebody else who might show up tomorrow and be willing to pay a higher price. And the third characteristic is fixed capacity. So when you're all rented up, you can't rent anymore. And those three characteristics determine what competition looks like in this industry. You want me to keep going?
Yeah. But fixed but variable capacity, because it might show up
we call it turnover.
Yeah.
So it's unlike a lot of this. We have a lot of models of kind of depleting inventory. So you have a depleting inventory when it runs out, it's done. We don't have a lot of models of what we call inventory turnover. So when somebody leaves, another person can come. It frees up the space. It's different than a lot of modeling that has been done in this industry. And so we model the uncertain demand with a random arrival process. We don't know who's going to arrive and what they're willing to pay. And we model the inventory turnover. And so it's a dynamic model of competition, and we have more than one person competing. And there's a couple of main findings. The first one is that at the high occupancies of apartments, and most apartments, nationally, I think this year it's 94% occupied. At those high occupancies, kind of think about how you get there. Well, demand increases, we've got fixed capacity, and the only thing that can adjust is price. So as more and more people arrive, price goes up. And what that means is at low occupancies, I'm fighting you for those new arrivals. But when the price gets up that high, as I get more, and as I get higher and higher occupancies, the price gets up that high, I'm competing more and more against the no purchase options. So what that means is that I'm not competing against rival apartment buildings. I'm competing against, somebody who can, go live with their parents again. And what that means is there's not very much competition. There's not very much substitution between rival apartment buildings. And so the collusion that's alleged, if it's occurring, and I have no opinion on that, if it's occurring, the price of the effect is very, very tiny, and it disappears at these high occupancies. And that's something that has not been featured very much in the case. And, one thing you learn, I used to work at the enforcement agencies, and one thing you learn, every industry is unique, and you have to model the peculiar characteristics of every industry to understand what's going on. And when we actually sat down and modeled this, we found a couple of surprising things. First, what we call substitution attenuation, and that's just jargon. It just means that at high occupancies, there's not much substitution between rival apartment buildings, and so there's not much gain to collusion.
Yeah.
We also found the option value of capacity, so of vacant apartments. So, I don't want to fill my apartments too much, because if somebody else comes along who has a higher value, I'm not going to be able to rent it. So that's an intertemporal concern that makes this a dynamic game rather than a static one. And the third feature is risk reduction. So if this software helps me kind of manage the uncertainty and lowers the whatever pricing errors that I may make, helps me price more accurately, I can that will help me out as an apartment owner, and should help and there's a consumer value there too. So it I'm making fewer pricing errors, so more people are served with existing capacity. So, well, I forgot one more peculiar feature of apartments. You can't manage uncertainty with hotel style reservations. Go to the, hey, I think there's a good chance I'll be out of my current apartment or I'll be leaving home in about 6 months. So can you sign me up for anyway, it just doesn't work that way. So that's another feature. So when we thought about, kind of taking all those three into account, you get a very different picture of how competition works in this industry than in kind of normal non-capacity constrained industries. Anyway, ask me a question.
Yeah. So this general thing about it being algorithmic pricing, right? The reason why these property managers want that software in the first place is because there is a lot of complexity in the pricing, right? Because of the factors that you mentioned, that you could be pricing too low, you could be pricing too high, and it's kind of difficult for to wrap
yeah. So most apartment owners have shareholders or investors that they have to answer to. So I'm an investor in an apartment building, and I'm trying to figure out if the manager is doing a good job. Well, I can look at the profit, but that's affected by a lot of things beyond the manager's control. I mean, it's hard to determine, well, what should the price be? Well, demand was down, demand was up. It's hard to blame that on the manager. One thing that's easy to monitor is occupancy. So I might, as an investor, I'll get a report from the manager who's managing my apartment building and saying, yeah, hey, we're doing a great job. We got occupancy of 95, 96. So there may be this and how do I get there? Well, I lower the price. Is that price too low? I don't know. That's hard to determine whether the price is too high or too low. But, there's this general idea in apartments that more occupancy is better, and that may not be the case because there's a trade-off, that more occupancy means lower prices, and that may be a price too low. So that may be a reason I'm pricing too low. That I'm just and maybe the software helps me correct that pricing. It has nothing to do with collusion. It just helps me manage that, and that's a correct human-induced pricing errors. We know there's a big field of psychology. Behavioral economics is psychology applied to economic questions. Behavioral economics that documents all these deviations from rationality, and one of them is called, and they give everything a name, so it's the availability bias. And so if I know I've got high occupancy, I want to hang on to that. So it's just a way of giving idea that, hey, people deviate from rationality, and maybe this software helps them correct that deviation. Anyway, the other setting that I think is important to remember. Not only are there cases against this, but you have a lot of municipalities banning the use of algorithms to help managers price apartment buildings, and that's kind of an interesting characteristic. I mean, so it's saying, hey, I'm a manager, I'm trying to do this thing. Hey, you can't use this software to help price, and I think that the way to understand that is in the 70s, we saw the advent of zoning, real zoning. So and it was basically in California, and people who have apartments or who live in a certain area, they want to prevent. So I'm a homeowner in a certain area, and I want to prevent new homes from being built, or gosh forbid, a new apartment being built near me, because that's going to lower my quality of life, lower the value of my building. So I can do that. I can prevent rivals from entering the industry by just complaining to my local council member and saying, hey, we need stricter zoning. So and they say, oh, it's for noise, sprawl, pollution. Really, there's also an economic incentive there. It's like, hey, I don't want competition that's gonna lower the value of my house. So, so there's if they did this together and they say, hey, let's get together and sabotage people from building new apartments, that'd be illegal. But, if I do it through the government, then all of a sudden it makes it legal. But it doesn't take away the incentive. And so what's happened? What's happened is that my children, so I'm 70 years old, my children's generation is growing up and they're finding housing completely unaffordable. There have been more kids living at home at any time in the United States. And part of the main reason for that, I would say, is the exorbitant price of housing. When I was a young married, my late wife and I bought a house and we spend about 30% of our income on housing costs. Now, if my kids, the price of housing has gone so up. If they wanted to buy a house or rent an apartment, they're going to spend 40% of their income on housing, and that's that's causing more and more of them to live at home.
Yeah.
And against this backdrop, politicians go, oh, yeah, I'm addressing the housing crisis
Right.
by banning the use of this software. I mean, this is. I mean, the cause of the housing crisis is zoning. And if we want to blame someone, we got to learn to point the finger at ourselves, because we're the one kind of complaining about new competition, new building, I don't know, or I wouldn't say competition, but new people in the neighborhood. I want to keep the character of my neighborhood the same. Yeah, I'm a historical preservationist or whatever excuse you want to do. But the naked truth is it restricts supply. And as demand has gone up, supply can't adjust, and the price is the price. And so these politicians kind of use this as kind of say, hey, I'm really trying to fix this problem, but that's not the problem. The problem is you, my constituents, who keep pressuring us to stop new construction. Anyway, that's my unslanted opinion. I'm sticking with it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the whole point of the podcast is to give every viewpoint without judgment. And also, I mean, in a way, what you're saying is that there's a housing crisis and somebody has to take the blame. The case that we're talking about, of course, is addressing the concerns of renters, which is, coming from the same side of addressing the housing crisis, but kind of saying algorithmic pricing is the culprit, so to say. And that's
a convenient scapegoat. Yeah.
I mean, that's kind of the backdrop, as you said, right?
Right.
In the larger context, obviously not in the minutiae of the case.
And it's funny. We see the same thing. So every year in June, people go on the road, go on road trips, when their kids get out of school, I'm going to take them to Disneyland or, wherever they go on road, and the demand for gasoline spikes, the price of gasoline goes up, and you call your congressman and say, hey, Congress is flooded with complaints about the high price of gasoline. And so the Congress calls the Federal Trade Commission, one of my former employers, and says, hey, look into this. We look into these high prices and make sure that nothing's going on. And so the FTC opens up an investigation, and they call around and they find, it was just the normal functioning of demand and supply. When demand goes up, price goes up, that's just what happens. And they issue a report, in the fall or the winter, and 6 months later, which is normal speed by Washington standards, prices is gone. Nobody's concerned about it anymore. But it's a way the Congress has of showing their constituency they're doing something, even though there's nothing to be done. It's just the normal functioning of a market. Same thing happens with fuel oil in the winter. Congress calls the Justice Department, because they're the ones who regulate who deal with fuel oil. We have a dual enforcement between the FTC and Department of Justice, although that's changing with some interesting recent Supreme Court decisions. But we have and the Justice Department will open investigation into fuel oil and find, when the weather gets cold, people people turn up the heat, and that's causing or use more heat, and that's causing the spike in demand, and that caused the high price in fuel oils. And by the time they issue their report, nobody cares about it anymore. But it's a way that Congress have of kind of releasing this pressure from constituents. And it's ironic that these agencies, these enforcement agencies, are being used as this kind of political pressure safety release. So instead of regulating fuel oil prices and gasoline prices, which I think would be disastrous, or not disastrous. Well, historically, it's been disastrous.
Yeah.
But instead of doing that, they call the FTC and have them do these investigations, and that releases the political pressure until it's until the next year, next June, when gas prices go up, or when the weather gets cold, when fuel oil prices get up. And so it's it seems like it's kind of similar to that. People are focusing on RealPage. Yeah, I don't think that has anything to do with the high price of housing.
So, I mean, this allegations of Sherman violation 1, violation of the Act 2, and then now again settling it without evidence of either violation begs the question that, again, as you said, every kind of collusion case, like we've talked about the fact that in the olden times, competitors would discuss pricing in a smoke-filled room. But
that's the metaphor, yeah.
But with the kind of software, with algorithms, it might be easier to do without kind of getting together.
That's the allegation.
That's the allegation. Exactly. Yeah.
Is that without this software, they wouldn't be able to fix prices. But they really haven't. Nobody really knows how the software works. It's proprietary algorithm by the company, and so they focused on the information that feeds it, and does it use information from other people who are using the same software? Does it? And first of all, it's a proprietary algorithm. Second of all, there's a couple different versions of the software, so it's hard to know exactly who's inferring what from which version of the software.
Yeah.
And because RealPage acquired some of its rivals, and to think about how would they fix prices? Well, they have to figure out, okay, apartments are so heterogeneous, so what price should we charge for this apartment? What price should we charge for that apartment? And then once we reach an agreement, how do we monitor it and punish people who are deviating? So if you and I are fixing prices, and I see you drop your price a little bit, or I think you're dropping your price a little bit and stealing some of the customers that would have come to me.
Yeah.
I might say, screw it, Seema's cheating on the agreement to fix prices. I'm out too. So I'm going to lower prices and start competing. But I don't know that, because I don't know what price you should be charging. Your apartment is so heterogeneous and so different than mine. How do I know whether or not you're fixing prices or not? Because I can't observe your price. I guess I can call you up and pretend to be a customer and say, hey, what price are you charging? And I might have a sense, what we agreed on. So I guess you could monitor it that way. But that's not something that you need the software to do. You just call it up and call you up and figure it. It's like looking at a price.
Yeah. I'm sure this happens even, as you said, without the software. People are engaging in, if there is, in some kind of these practices with or without the software.
Benchmarking. It's benchmark.
Yeah.
It's like MBA 10 or Business School 101, just like, hey, benchmark your practices against your rivals and try to see, why you're different. And if you're charging too low, you go, oh man, I've been charging way too low. Maybe I'm just so focused on occupancy. I could have made a lot more money by lowering my occupancy or raising my price. And I just didn't know that, but the software maybe helps me kind of optimize where I wouldn't be able to because of all these psychological biases. And And by benchmarking against you, I kind of know which apartments you have available. I mean, think about, I'm talking about apartment buildings being heterogeneous. What about apartments? We had a 2-bedroom with a view. We got a 3-bedroom with courtyard, and a pool. I mean, how do we even think about that kind of heterogeneity? And how would I be able to, kind of in my mind say, okay, yeah, you're cheating on the cartel. You're not charging enough price. You're cheating on the cartel. So I think it'd be very difficult to do given the characteristics of this industry. And I think that ties into the settlements. And so I certify a class of renters who've been allegedly harmed by this software. And I go to and we have private right of action in the United States. So that means if you're a consumer that's been harmed by some kind of merger or price fixing agreement, some kind of anti-competitive behavior, you can go to court and try to the defendants or sue the people that you think are raising price or price fixing and go to court and you each present your best case, and then a judge will be able to hear your best case, hear the defendant's best case, and make a determination. Damn expensive economists and to testify and examine the case. You have to hire expensive lawyers to defend it. And it takes a long time. And that one of the biggest costs of a trial to a company is that, if I'm working at the company, it's been sued for, however many million bucks. And I don't know what's that going to mean or what's going to happen following that suit. I may leave and who's going to leave? Well, it's the best employees that have outside options. And so, that's another cost. And so if I've been sued for a price fixing case and a judge has, I might just try to settle the case. And I say, okay, it's going to cost, I'll go to you. So you're the plaintiff. And I go, hey, it's going to cost us $10 million to do this trial. And, let's suppose it's a 50-50 outcome. Tell you, so it's worth $5 million to me to settle. It's worth $5 million to you to settle. Let's just split the difference. Okay, let's just not flip a coin of a trial. Let's just just say, hey, on average it's going to cost each of us $5 million. Or it's going to cost me $5 million so we just split. I'll pay you some amount, and I avoid the expense and difficulty and delay of a trial. And I think that may be what's going on in these settlements, and the fact that you don't see any these cases going to trial and actually getting, so I'd love to see the evidence of these things. So let's take it to trial, let a judge see all the evidence, find out exactly what the software does, and see what evidence the people are producing. The only evidence that I know of, there's been a really interesting paper by an economist, I think at Wharton, who looked at RealPage penetration in areas, that had high RealPage penetration. A lot of apartment owners were using it, and compared it to areas where there's low penetration, and try to figure out. And she found that there was higher prices in areas with high penetration. But here's the rub. The prices, there was enough data to be statistically significant difference, but the difference was only 1.5%. And compared to, normal cartels, and I don't even know what that means, but in other published papers where people try to estimate what's the effect of a cartel, they find double-digit price increases. They don't find 1.5%. And the thing that gives me a little bit of confidence about my approach to this, the model that we've built about this industry, and kind of use the model to figure out what would prices have been if they competed, what would they have been if they colluded. The difference is so small because of the substitution attenuation. I would say that my theoretical model is consistent with the empirical model that's getting published in a very good journal. And so I don't know that, but that's the rub. That's really hard to figure out causality. What is causality? So if I do something and it raises price, and then I stop doing it and the price goes down, that's a good indicator that there's some kind of causal mechanism for whatever I'm doing, whatever I did to raise price, that caused price to go up. But it's hard to, so empirically, it's hard to figure out, well, was there something else changing at the same time? Or go back to the Calder-Wang piece, maybe there's something different about the areas that had high penetration. Maybe they had higher costs too, and that was driving up the price, not the software. So it's so that's the problem with empirical papers. The advantage of doing it in a theoretical sense is you can control all of it. But there's also the rub. Does the theoretical model fit the industry that you're talking about? And the way we modeled it, we have the random demand. People show up, they don't make reservations you have a random demand, you have fixed capacity, and then you have random departures. People stay for 3 or 4 years in an apartment on average, and then they leave at random times. And we actually modeled that as an independent. They come according to price. They'll arrive to a market and then choose among the open alternatives according to price, and then they'll leave after a random duration stay. And I heard that there's this saying among real estate agents that people depart from apartments due to, they're called the 3Ds I forget the 3Ds of something, but the one is death, divorce, and job relocation. And so those are the 3 reasons that people depart from, and we modeled those as independent of price. And so that's trying to take account of all those characteristics was what the model does. So I try to make the model fit, what we can observe about the industry, and then use it to forecast, kind of estimate the difference between what does collusion look like in the model, what does competition look like in the model. So we can control that.
Yeah. So you examine the states where there might be collusion, and then when there is no collusion, right? To compare.
Well, that's what Calder-Wang did in her empirical piece.
Okay.
And no, I think it was in a given area, and she just looked in the, I think it was in Seattle, and she looked I can't remember what areas she used, but she looked in areas that had high RealPage penetration. Maybe it was zip code, I don't know, and areas that had low RealPage penetration. But that was the natural experiment again.
Yeah. And
go ahead.
And the conclusion drawn from that paper was
price went up by 1.5%.
And so it's not enough. Is that? I mean,
well,
I'm curious how it was.
Yeah, I mean, it was following these collusion allegations against RealPage, and so that certainly motivated the paper. She said, "Well, let's test it."
Yeah,
and she had a co-author too, but I called her. Anyway,
I think Calder-Wang and
two people. I don't want to shortchange the second author, but anyway, so that was the motivation, and so they tested it, and they found that in areas with high RealPage penetration, price was 1.5% higher, and that could be collusion. Is it worth the antitrust risk that of to gain 1.5% in price? Most it's way below normal. I mean normal, but other collusion in other settings, and so and they never went to trial. I mean, I would love one of these cases to go to trial and get all the evidence and just look at it, and say, okay, what happened? What evidence did they have? How do we judge that evidence? Is there another explanation for it? What's going on here? And we really haven't been through that yet, because all these cases are settling just for it's so costly to go to trial. There's a huge financial incentive to settle. And so if I can get a class, if I'm a plaintiff's lawyer and I go, oh yeah, we're going after everybody who uses RealPage, and I'm going to put together a class of aggrieved customers, and we're going to sue, and then hopefully we'll, the class will get certified by a judge, and then we can, gain the settlement suit for nuisance value, and hopefully that's a money, that the plaintiffs think, that'll be a money making strategy.
Yeah.
But anyway, I'm skeptical just because of my theoretical model, but and because of the characteristics of the apartment
Yeah.
market, the heterogeneity and
How much
so
is the
go ahead.
occupancy on the renter market? The occupancy nationwide, like these
Well,
units?
the people, I have no idea where those estimates. I Googled, what's the occupancy, and there's people who track this. And I haven't been, but in the apartments that I know, people talk about occupancy a lot. And I know that nationwide it's gone down in the last couple of years. So it's gone down from like 95 to 94. And I think it's going down lower still, but I don't know the reason for that. It could be they're turning over more or who knows? But yeah, people track this, but markets like this, especially, are really local.
Mhm.
People want to live in a certain area, a certain neighborhood, certain zip code, and people should arrive to a city and I'm just going to take the best price I can. They look at a lot of factors, and it's hard to organize a cartel with such heterogeneity like that. So anyway, we'll see.
Yeah. So in your paper, you've demonstrated, that this price collusion is not. I mean, you don't find any evidence of that.
Well, it's not evidence, but
I mean,
if this is how firms are competing, which our model could be wrong. I could be totally wrong about how firms are, but given what I know about how competition in this market works, we've tried to model those essential features, the random arrivals, the fixed capacity, the option value, that demand uncertainty, the uncertain demand that creates about an apartment, trying to take all that into account, and then using dynamic game theory. So people are playing this game that not only, today, but tomorrow. And you're playing this intertemporal game, and it's that option value of capacity, which creates the intertemporal nature of the payoff functions, because I can leave an apartment vacant and hopefully, higher value person will come tomorrow.
yeah,
You try to take all those things into account and see what the model says. And so the advantage of a theoretical model like that is, I can tell you the difference between competition and collusion in the context of the model. And the model's been calibrated to something we can observe, like occupancy. And I said, okay, yeah, that makes sense to me. And an empirical model, the model is from evidence, but again, you're comparing areas with high real page penetration to low real page penetration. Maybe there's something else that's some confounding factor that's polluting the results of that comparison.
yeah. And before you were saying that, you would love to see the evidence, right?
Yeah.
What is the harm? But when the Department of Justice goes for these cases, what is the evidence that they gather before going about?
They interview people. So they'll go and interview the people they'll call up people and say, okay, you're an apartment manager. What software do you use? How do you use it? And do you ever discuss prices with rivals? They
Soft
do
into
you ever exchange information?
Yeah.
And do you ever give the software information? Do you ever get the feeling that they look at the allegations and they try to find evidence that would either refute or affirm those allegations, and they do those investigations. And if there are data involved, they collect the data and try to clean the data and try to test it. And like the academic paper we were talking about, look at real page penetration. But, it's usually there's not time enough to do that in the context of an investigation. But anyway, we'll see. I mean, so that's why I was saying I'd really like to see the evidence behind these allegations and, put it through a stress test, and let's see if what that looks like. And one of the ironic things about this irony is my favorite kind of humor, but that's not why I developed this model. But one of the ironic kind of predictions of the model is that if you share information about occupancy with rivals, you can, so what happens is that as I get higher and higher occupancy, I start raising my price, and so demand is increasing, and so I'm raising my price. But if I learn your occupancy, if I know that you're occupied and you're less likely to take an arriving customer because you're high occupancy, I will raise my price as well. Not as big effect as the effect of my own occupancy on price, but your occupancy would affect my price too if we're close substitutes. And so if I learn your occupancy, I can price, not only my own occupancy, but I can raise my price when you get occupied, when your occupancy goes up, because I know you're not going to be able to take as many of the customers. I don't have to compete for as hard with you because you're at a high occupancy. And so, but on the other hand, when you're at low occupancy, I'm going to lower my price, if your occupancy goes down. And so it actually, when you put it in the model, it intensifies competition because we're competing in every state of the market, both your occupancy and my occupancy. So when I don't have your information, I'm just pricing on my own occupancy, and I'm competing on your average occupancy. But when I have both our occupancies, I can set price according to the combinations of occupancies we have. And that's much more intense competition than would be the case if I were just pricing on your average occupancy or the market average occupancy, and kind of just, pricing on my own occupancy and just making assumptions about what your occupancy is. And the analogy to that is geographic price discrimination. If I'm in a grocery store and I can set different prices in different areas, and if I'm just setting a single price, I'm the only place and you're a rival grocery store. Everybody that's closer to you, travel cost plus the price is cheaper to go to you, will go to you, and everybody that's closer to me will go to me. And the only place we'll compete are along the borders of our market areas. And so that's the area of competition. But if I can price discriminate, I'm going to say, hey, I'm going to put some discount coupons in the mail and send it to everybody who's next to Seema's grocery store. And I'm going to stop discount. I'm going to raise the prices. I'm going to stop discounting for people who are located next to me. And that's how price discrimination works. You charge higher prices to the higher value customers who are right next to me, and lower prices to the people who are far away from me. And that'll make me more money unless you respond in kind. So you start sending discount coupons in the mail to people who are located right next to me. And all of a sudden, we're bidding for every single zip code in our joint market area. And that's really intense competition. And that's analogous to the kind of competition that would be unleashed if people shared occupancy information about apartments. And that was a kind of a funny, ironic conclusion that came out of the model.
And it kind of directly kind of addresses the this second, the thing that came out from the Justice Department in November of 2025, requiring RealPage to end the sharing of competitively sensitive information.
That's a much better characterization of the irony. The remedy in the case, they didn't approve anything, but they got the settlement, which is, hey, you can't share information. So now I have to price based on my own occupancy, and I can't use yours. And so I'm not going to unleash that really intense competition.
So the remedy, in fact, deters or kind of exacerbates the problem.
It shuts off this kind of potentially pro-competitive channel. And so and again,
based on the model,
humility. You got to have humility about anytime you do this kind of work. It's dependent on so many things. We got to characterize what we think the competition looks like, use the model is that accurately capturing what the competition looks like, and then use the model to forecast the potential counterfactual, because you need counterfactuals to prove causality or liability and damages. So if I'm a plaintiff, I've got to show that the defendant has done something wrong, and that if they stop doing that, or that price would go down, or that if they keep doing that, price would stay high. And that's the definition of causality. If I do something and price goes up and it's not just spurious correlation, then I'm causing that price to go up. The plaintiff has this huge burden of proof. They got to show what the defendant has done, raise price. And if they didn't do that, that would lower price. And the irony of this paper is that the remedy is supposed to kind of stop the sharing of information so that leads to collusion. But if they're competing and you stop sharing the information, then you kind of stop that intense state-by-state competition that I talked about earlier.
Yeah, which had the potential of
raising prices because I can't compete as intensely anymore.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's the irony of it all, and
Yeah.
I love irony.
So, okay, but on the other hand, I mean, just coming full circle, settlement in 2025 and subsequently, so where is this headed now?
I don't know. I mean, you could see more and more settlements. People maybe start reading this paper and go, hey, Froeb makes some really good points here. Maybe we ought not to bring this case. It's not a positive expected value to bring this case and try to settle for the nuisance value of the case. But, maybe some more empirical work will be done, and it will show that Froeb's predictions are wrong. And this, something wrong with his model. And we'll go back and look at the model and say, what could we have gotten wrong?
Yeah.
Every model is a simplification of reality. And it's not that every model is wrong in that sense. It's not exactly reality. It's a simplification of an abstraction.
Yeah.
And try to figure out, okay, what assumptions really drive these results? And, and the assumptions that drive the results, I think, are the salient features of apartment competition, fixed competition, uncertain demand, and heterogeneity. And the heterogeneity is not, something we've modeled, but other people modeled it. And it's really hard to think about a regular cartel, getting together, fixing prices and figuring out how to reach agreement on price and how do I detect deviations from the agreement, because if we reach agreement and you can cheat on the agreement by lowering price and stealing some of my demand, that would, in a normal cartel model, again, normal in air quotes, that's profitable to do. And I've got to figure out a way to prevent that from happening.
Yeah.
And the heterogeneity of the models, the difficulty of observing price reductions, suppose you just say, okay, first 2 months you got free rent, or first 3 months you got free rent. That doesn't show up in the statistics anymore. So that, how would I detect that? Well, I guess I could still call you up, pretend to be a renter and say, how much free rent are you going to give me? And that may be part of the way I monitor, that could be part of the cartel agreement. Hey, we're only going to give 2 months free rent and you got to charge whatever price it is. How I'm going to monitor that. And maybe those would be monitorable.
Yeah.
But I don't know. And that's why I'm fascinated to see, these things go to trial and actually find out how these guys fix price.
Yeah.
How they reached agreement on price and how they thought they were going to force the agreement,
Yeah.
Anyway, so I'd love to see that. We did, when I was at the Department of Justice, or when I was at the FTC, we did a lot of postmortems, which we looked at mergers that we let through or mergers we didn't challenge and see if price went up. Most of the times it was, because obviously we can't observe the post-merger world if we block the merger, but if we let the merger go through, and there's been a lot of those kind of we called them postmortems, after the fact, and we did them. We mostly found that the price didn't go up when we did all these postmortems, and actually we did some postmortems on when I was at the FTC, we'd lost a bunch of hospital mergers.
Yeah.
We'd lost like 10 in a row because of the difficulty of delineating a hospital market. Yeah. And we did a postmortem on this merger of the two hospitals in Evanston, Illinois, on the north side of Chicago, were merged, and we did a postmortem on the merger, and we found that price went up like 20% or something like that. I can't remember what the exact number was, but it went up by a pretty big margin. And we used that as evidence that, hey, this, hospitals, even though it was hard to delineate an exact market, the nearby hospitals were, using traditional methods, because people always, there was always somebody who traveled pretty far distance to get to a hospital. So use traditional methods. And we used that to get the FTC back in the hospital merger business. And we used that, and we successfully challenged some mergers, that consummated mergers. And that's radically changed hospital merger enforcement. That kind of, my old boss, Tim Muros, who was chairman of the FTC, used to call it enforcement R&D. Like, okay, we're doing all this stuff. Why don't we figure out if it's having an effect? Or when we don't do it, in the hospital case, when we're not allowed to challenge a merger, when the courts are very skeptical of us challenging a merger, and what would happen if we don't challenge. And so we had some clean natural experiments. We had areas that we had control areas that were nearby that didn't experience hospital mergers. And anyway, so we did a difference in difference. One difference was pre and post merger. And the second difference was the experimental group versus the control group. And sure enough, the experimental group was the merging hospitals. They raised relative to the control group. And that was a pretty clean, clear evidence that, hey, what we were doing, trying to challenge these hospital mergers was a really good idea. And the problem, it's very difficult to do that without. It takes a lot of resources, and, you have to, the FTC has this it's called 6A, I think 6A. I think that's the right statute. Anyway, this ability to do these industry specific studies. And we used our 6A authority to subpoena data from hospitals that emerged and got some.
Yeah, I read somewhere you had this quote, if merger is the answer, what is the question?
It's funny. We get to see one of the things that's really fun, and this is a huge pitch for going to work at the agencies.
Yeah.
If you want to merge, and I forgot what the limit is. I think it's like 50, 80 million bucks, whatever. If you have a big merger, you have to file what are called Hart-Scott-Rodino forms with both agencies, the Department of Justice and the FTC. And we get to, one of the questions is called 4C, any studies, reports, or analyses of the potential effects of the acquisition. And I can't remember how it's exactly framed, but we get all these internal memos showing why people are merging. And it's funny. We the attorneys and the attorneys would, and sometimes they're really informative. You go, wow, why are these guys? But a lot of times they give it to they know they want to merge. They just don't want to, for what various reasons, they don't put a lot of forethought into it. And so they give the task to a junior, like an intern, or like a junior partner at the law firm or a company. The company is merging, and they say, okay, justify this merger, and they go back to their textbooks and they look at all the reasons for merging, and they come up with the last one, to eliminate competition. So if they don't know any better, they'll just write, yeah, and it takes care of some eliminating our competition.
Yeah.
And then and then the attorneys will go, and that's the proverbial smoking gun of a merger investigation. So they go into court and say, oh yeah, look at this smoking gun. They said they were going to raise prices, and that's exactly what they're going to do. And the defense will always put on the brain damaged middle management defense. They'll say, this is written by some brain damaged middle manager who just had no idea what he was talking about. But anyway, and it could be that and the reason it works is it could be brain damaged middle management. Just say, okay, just justify this merger, and I don't really care why. They're not thinking about the antitrust, but now, antitrust counsel is so that kind of stuff is rare, but it used to be. But it's fun reading all those memos, and a lot of them are just total BS, or just copied right out of a strategy textbook. What are all the reasons for merging? And not much specifics. And having said that, I've seen some really good, well thought out, plans for why are we acquiring this company? What are we doing? How are we going to exploit it? Or how is it going to make us grow? And so some are very, very persuasive. But at the time I wrote that piece,
Yeah.
I was reading a lot of these things that just look like they just look like nonsense. But there wasn't much backing them up. But I've seen some really detailed, kind of really interesting studies of like, why are we merging and what is this going to do?
Yeah. Okay. So, this paper by Luke Froeb and Stephen
Tschantz, yeah, it's German, and Danny Sokol.
And Sokol. The paper is titled Algorithmic Pricing in Capacity Constrained Markets. This article has been submitted to the Management Science Journal, correct?
Yeah, management science. It's funny, when we started working on this, I'm an economist, and that's what I'm used to publishing with in the area I'm used to publishing. But the bulk of the work kind of in these kind of characteristics, demand uncertainty and capacity constraints, that bulk of that is in the field of operations research.
Yeah.
And I'm totally unfamiliar with, or mostly unfamiliar with the field. And I had to read up a lot about, because that's where most of the methodology is that we borrow from. The one thing that we brought to the thing is dynamic oligopoly. There are some oligopoly, more and more, but usually the fields are in these separate silos. The management science people do optimization, the economists do game theory, and there wasn't much interaction between those two methodologies. But yeah, reading, so this kind of bridges those two fields, and more fields are becoming more open to, using other methodologies, and it's getting so much easier to search for related literature.
Yeah.
But, and so, rightly so, that the fields are becoming more and more the hubris, or I don't know what you call it, the bias toward, your own methodology, your own discipline. You're seeing, at least, I've seen economics kind of being adopted by more and more areas. That's more what I'm concerned about. But in this particular thing, we borrowed a lot of stuff from operations research, and there's a lot of related research, very similar methodologies.
Yeah.
But they're mostly monopoly models. Not all, but they don't really talk about competition and game theory, which is how most economists model competition these days.
So, any other things you want to share about the model per se? Again,
No, it's so much. Anyway, I really, really enjoyed doing this. And if I'm talking to junior researchers, when you come out of graduate school, so almost every graduate student that graduates from a PhD program in economics has been taught using models. And so they read a model, and then they read improvement on the model, or they read, several generations of the models. And a lot of papers start by reviewing the existing methodology and say, well, okay, but here's what we're doing. This is what we're doing is better, more general, or more interesting than what's been done before. And I call that supply push research. And the cost of that, or the downside of that, is that you have people producing research that nobody values, except other economists. And if you talk to anybody in the field, they have some idea of like, how much of the research produced in your area do you think is valuable? And that, it doesn't matter whom you ask, but most of the people say most of it's not very valuable. And I would put the figure at like 90% of the research is not that useful or valuable to society. And the difference, and I'm not saying, my research is that valuable to society, but mine's all motivated by real cases. And so, clients been sued, and I got a model competition to figure out, what the damages are. And so at least it's a demand pull. Somebody wants to pay for it. It's passed a market test. Somebody wants to pay for the research. And so at least it has that going for it. And hopefully it'll help future enforcement or future policy in this area. And maybe somebody say, hey, the cases that we've been bringing, there may be not much merit to them because at the high occupancies we see, there's really not much of a price effect. So I
Yeah.
don't think we have to spend our scarce enforcement resources, especially the agencies, in doing something. I'm not sure this is really valuable in this particular industry, in apartments with uncertain demand, fixed capacity, and heterogeneity. And I think that all those three things kind of point in the same direction, that collusion is not much of a problem in this industry.
Yeah.
And the relief that they ask for may have the exact opposite effect. So it's anyway, that's I guess that's the
The gist of it. Yeah.
that's my final unslanted opinion.
Yeah, which is great. So basically, in the evidence of harm and the remedy, there's a problem, which your
I
paper.
think there's a problem.
Yeah,
I'm going to be more humble than saying, yeah, there is. Although once you say you're humble, you're probably not. So another
I,
irony.
I was thinking in my podcast, Luke is talking about humility. I must have done something. I mean, it's funny, but I love the fact that you explain the economics with such flair and slanted opinions, and but at the same time you're talking humility. Also, I mean, it's good. It is always, you are a class act when it comes to teaching, and I always love to engage with you inside and outside the classroom, as so many of your students have done in the past. So I really appreciate your shedding light on these important topics, and I would have you anytime that you're available. And, I think my listeners will benefit from this podcast for sure.
Anytime. Yeah, it's been a delight. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Luke, and look forward to seeing you soon.
Bye-bye.